Justin Webb, how are you?
I'm good. I'm good. I appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Absolutely. You should check out Jared Webb, though. He does the Zero Dark 30 coffee, like vet coffee. It's fantastic coffee. I've had him on several times. That's why I kept saying Jared.
Gotcha. I'll have to check it out.
Yeah, it's good stuff. So you run the Foundation for Wildlife Management.
Yes, sir. I'm the executive. I serve as the executive director.
Perfect. This is a nonprofit. I got introduced to this because roundabout way, I was doing a bunch of interviews with the Eagle mayor candidates, and somebody by the name of Burke Mantell got a hold of me because he was like, hey, there's some problems with the way the BLM land is being managed. And I had him in. It turns out he was the one that introduced wild turkeys to the state of Idaho back like 40 years ago.
Wow.
Yeah. So he moved here like, I think right when he had turned 40 or something. And there were only something like 30 wild turkeys in the state. And so I guess he got a hold of the requisite people and was like, we should start bringing these in. It's a great hunting season, and brought in like a turkey caller. It was pretty cool, right? And he introduced me to Carter Niemeyer.
Yep.
And again, the only thing I knew about Carter Niemeyer is that when I was in elementary school, I saw Never Cry Wolf and a documentary about how they were reintroducing wolves to Yellowstone. And Burke Mantell's like, yeah, that was him. I'm like, what do you mean that was him? He was like, yeah, he was one of the trappers that was engaged in this program. So I had Carter Niemeyer on, had a great conversation with him, but then it uncorked this like insane can of worms where all of a sudden, just because I had him on, everybody was like furious. I'm like, wait, hang on. So then I started having different conversations with Seth Simpson, who's fantastic. He's a dog houndsman, dog trainer, trained my dog, but also does coyote and wolf hunting, who's awesome. Stuck in the Rut gentleman from up north as well, had him on, and just various people. And I've really been meaning to talk to you because I really like that you have a program where it's like, listen, we have a problem as citizens. We have an issue here. We need this resolved. In the absence of a government program that already addresses it, you guys made one, and you are attempting to manage the predator population so that we have a sufficient abundance of wildlife so that hunters and whatnot can recreate and we can enjoy that stuff. Is that pretty accurate?
Yeah, I'd say that's pretty accurate.
So look, talk to me about it. How did you get involved in this? What is the program? You guys do hunter and trapper training. You do all kinds of things with especially you do reimbursement as well, correct? For costs?
That's correct.
Talk to me about this. What is driving you to deal with the wolf population? How do you view wolves as having a place or not having a place in our ecosystem? Hit me with the whole thing.
Well, honestly, I think to get the full depth of the situation, we really have to back up a long ways. Growing up off the great in North Idaho, I have always had a huge passion for the outdoors, for wildlife. I actually wanted to be a wildlife biologist. That was my big goal before I found, girls and alcohol and rodeos and things like that when I was in high school. But anyhow, I did go to school for a little while, but didn't end up pursuing that career. Long story short, became a very passionate backcountry elk and mule deer hunter. Absolutely, more than anything, just the experiences that I've got to have in the backcountry of North Idaho are near and dear to my heart, and something that I want the next generation to get to experience. So when I first heard that wolves were going to be introduced to Idaho specifically, I was excited about it. I actually grew up with a wolf as a pet. They're the most amazing animal I've ever been around, and I thought it was going to be a great thing, to be honest. I never really thought about anything beyond the education that I had received, which at that point was simply what National Geographic had taught us.
Right.
Right. And so I had this mental image of what a wolf was. Well, when the wolf population started to really expand around 2007, 2008, we were starting to see wolf tracks here and there. You'd go up elk hunting and cut a fresh set of wolf tracks in the snow, or we'd be out hiking looking for antlers or something in the middle of winter and come across wolf tracks. Never heard them howl. I think it was around 2008 when I heard the first wolf howl in the backcountry. I was actually on a mule deer hunt, and I thought it was just the coolest thing. Neatest sound I'd ever heard. Fast forward a little bit, it took about 2 years after that where a wolf track that would show up in a drainage here or there became every place we went. There were wolves. There were wolf tracks running up and down every single drainage. There's some really popular snowmobile areas out of Clark Fork, Idaho, that used to have a really abundant moose population. And, it was nothing to go drive a loop between Trestle Creek and Lightning Creek per se. And you might run into a dozen moose. And some of those you'd have to sit and wait for them to get out of the road. It was actually an annoyance. There were so many moose. All of a sudden, the snowmobilers started talking about moose being chewed up and standing in the snowmobile trails. And so we started going out and kind of trying to investigate and identify what is going on. Well, many of those moose were still alive, and their hamstrings were all chewed up, and their innards would be hanging out their backside, and they'd just be laying in the ditches along the snowmobile trails. And there was a lot of confusion. Nobody understood it, right? We were all convinced that wolves only killed the sick and the weak, that they only would take what they needed to feed themselves, that only the alpha male and female bred. There's all these different conceptions or messaging that were linked to wolves that, as a population of people who had never been around wolves, we had a perception of what a wolf was. And when they showed up in abundance, we quickly realized that not all those things are true. And so this image that I had of a wolf being this majestic, just amazing animal, like the pinnacle of wilderness,
Did you ever see The Fantastic Mr. Fox?
I can't say as though I did.
No, it's a movie that came out recently. George Clooney's like it's based on a kid's story, but at the end of the movie, they see this wolf, and it's portrayed as this like beautiful, incredible creature, and like it doesn't talk, and then they like do this hand thing, not like a Hail Hitler thing, just like a salute thing. And so yeah, like I 100% get what you're saying, that there is a portrayal of wolves as these very majestic, incredible wilderness animals.
Yeah, it's almost like the pinnacle of all things that are wild, right? I mean, that's the perception, and that was my perception at that point in time as well. Growing up with a wolf as a pet was an interesting thing. Absolutely amazing dog, but could not keep her home no matter what you did. She just was a runner, and that's what they're born to do, and what that's just how they live their lifestyle. But so, long story short, the wolf abundance started to become linked to the negative. The wolf abundance started to be linked imagery wise to all of these suffering moose in the snowmobile trails. All of a sudden, where we thought we had a wolf pack that would be staying in the backcountry and only let people see them if we were in the backcountry, they started showing up out on the front country, out on the front range where the winter range was. They started showing up in the snowmobile trails. They started running the roadways. They started running the hiking trails, and everywhere we went, there were wolf tracks everywhere. Well, when we got our first wolf season, we had already started to see a huge decline in elk population, especially in the backcountry. And a lot of people, they view hunting as, I guess it's different for everybody. In North Idaho, as kids, we didn't go on vacation. We went to elk camp, right? I mean, that was vacation. That's where you learn to respect nature. That's where you learn to build a fire. That's where you learned survival skills. That's right. Where you learn to have respect for the world around you. You went to a campsite and you always left it better than you found it.
Sure.
That kind of thing, packing garbage out and things. So all of a sudden, this wolf abundance is creating negativity. We're seeing elk numbers decline. We're seeing our moose populations just tank, which the moose were already in decline due to various factors. We were already, our caribou population was something that had been struggling for a number of years, and all of a sudden wolves showed up and the caribou just flat disappeared. You couldn't even find a caribou track anymore. So we got a wolf season, and we thought, this small group of backcountry hardcore elk hunters from North Idaho thought we were going to go solve the problem. Let's reduce some wolf numbers so that we can continue to have an abundance of everything else, and pretty much made a pact not to go elk hunting, but to spend that time targeting wolves. We got to the end of the season and nobody harvested a single wolf. And so then the question became, well, what, holy cow, how do we solve this problem? Why is this so hard? Started doing some research, and the guys were all looking at Canada and Alaska, trying to talk to those who had been managing wolves for a long period of time, and everybody talked about how trapping was really the only mechanism that would control their numbers, because hunter success rate is so low, because wolves are such an amazing animal, and they truly are. And so the group of guys only knew one trapper. They sat him down. They offered to buy him lunch. He came to town. They sat him down and said, "We need you to teach us how to trap wolves." And he just shook his head and he said, "I don't trap wolves." And they said, "Well, wait a minute. What are you talking about? You're the only one we know that knows how to do this. This is a real problem. We need you to trap wolves." And he said, "No, I'm not going to trap wolves." And they said, "Well, do you hunt elk?" And he goes, "Well, of course I hunt elk. That's how we feed the family through the winter." He trapped all winter and kept the freezer full from hunting season and farmed all summer. And he said, "Wolf trapping is going to cost you so much money, you won't be able to do it." And everybody was confused, but knowing that he was the only person that they knew that could get the job done, they started putting money on the table. One of the guys said, I'll pay you. Seriously, what'll it take?" One person had spent close to $3,000 targeting wolves that winter and came up empty-handed. And so for $500, the conversation kind of came full circle. And he said for $500, he'd be willing to run some wolf traps while he's trapping for bobcat and pine marten, which is how he paid his bills through the wintertime. So fast forward a little bit from there, that conversation led to the group getting a hold of the big game biologist locally there in the Panhandle at the time. And that led to contacting a lawyer, trying to make sure that this would be a legal activity. We got our 501c3 status in 2012. And since then, we've grown to 11 chapters spanning Idaho and Montana. We've got about 3,500 members from 43 different states. Most of those recreate or live in Idaho or Montana, where we actively reimburse members for their expenses to get out outside of their deer and elk hunting to specifically target wolves.
Man, what a story. So you started and you got the 501c3 2012, you said?
Correct.
Okay. When did you trap your first wolf?
Oh gosh, I didn't trap my first wolf for a few years after that.
Tell me about it. What
So
happened?
I've been really blessed in my hunting career, and I just got to tell you, as a young guy, I set a goal of harvesting each of, back then it was 9 big game animals that Idaho had to offer, and I've got my own perception of what a trophy is to me specifically. And I kind of set this goal that I was going to have, before I ended my hunting career, I would have what I consider to be a trophy specimen of each of those species before I stopped hunting. And I've been really successful at that. Elk, whitetail, mule deer, black bear, anything that I've really pursued in a big way, I've been successful with. And I went out targeting wolves, and they just flat whooped me. Talk about an education. That is the most amazing animal that there is in our country. I just can't say that enough. People think that I hate wolves, and anybody who's spent any amount of time pursuing wolves can't leave the situation without at least having a high level of respect for them, because they truly are that amazing. They act to some degree similar to a mountain lion. They're just real cagey. They don't let you see them very often. I can tell you that out of I think I've trapped 43 wolves. I've shot 2 wolves, and outside of that one instance where I shot the 2 wolves, I'd only ever seen wolves 2 times that weren't in traps.
Okay, so talk to me about trapping the first one.
The very first one. Well, so I got a phone call one day from a guy that had just found a wolf kill. And he said, "Justin, I know that you've been looking into wolf trapping, and you took the trapping course and everything, and you're the only one that I know that's really interested in this. Or, do you want to come up and try to trap wolves up here?" And I said, "You bet. I'll give it a shot." So I watched every YouTube video and every piece of information that I could get my hands on. I read the trapping manual from Alaska. talked to as many people as I could find that had been successful in trapping, and everybody said that it take a lot of patience and a lot of work, and wolves sometimes take a long time to come back around. And I had no idea what I was up against going into it. I basically hiked 3 miles one way on my snowshoes all winter one year, trying to trap wolves at this one set location. The very first trip that I went up there, I took 6 snares with me. I set them all out, being very cautious as to, make sure that where I was setting them was an area that a wolf would walk, but that a deer or elk or moose would not, that sort of thing. And the very first night, I went back up there the next day and I had caught one and it had broke my snare. And so I was like, oh, well, here I'm thinking, oh, arrogantly, oh, this isn't that hard. I've already got one caught. I'll get one tomorrow night. Yeah, this is no problem. Well, I trapped all season and never had another instance where I'd actually made a catch or even came close. So at the end of the year, I hiked in and I packed up all my gear and kind of tucked my tail and walked back out of there feeling defeated. And I thought, well, there's got to be a secret, like I'm missing something, right? So I learned a whole bunch more. I buy some foot traps, and I had never trapped anything in my life. I had no idea what I was getting into. So I bought some foot traps and I went back up there the following season, and I spent every waking moment trying to target wolves, trying to learn about wolves, tracking wolves down, trying to understand their movements. Why are they coming down off the top of the mountain here? Why are they only here every 3 to 5 weeks? Where are they spending the rest of their time? And at the very last day, I think I was like 3 days before season closed, I went up there and I get to my first set of gear. I didn't foot trap anything that year, but I had snares out that I came close with. And the snow is melting really, really rapidly in the month of March. And I hike in there and here's wolf tracks. They finally come down again after, the whole month of being gone. And the wolves walked right underneath every snare I had in one section of ground. And so here, I'm 2 seasons deep and I'm just heartbroken because here they've beat me again. The weather has dismantled my plan. And so I'm coiling up all my snares and I pack all that up and I hike another 1.5 miles in and I drop down into where I've got some other gear and I'm walking along and I'm pouting and I'm, rolling all my snares up and putting them in my backpack. And I had 2 that I had to go across a creek on a log to get to. And I get there and I look over there and I don't see nothing. And I'm thinking, well, a whole nother season down. And I walk across the log and I go over and I roll up the first snare and I'm coiling it up. And I take a couple steps and I look down and there's movement on the backside of this big cedar tree. And I mean, my brain, it all happened so fast. My brain registered that there was movement. Then I saw gray hair, like long gray hair. And this wolf stands up and it's, most of the time snares, just like a UFC fighter in the ring, they choke them out really rapidly. And so the snare comes tight, cuts off the blood flow to the brain, the wolf drops, and it's just done almost instantly. Well, this wolf has not even pulled the snare tight. And so it stands up, and I'm only 3 feet from it, and it's way bigger than I expected them to be. And so I'm scrambling backwards, trying to get my pistol out of its holster, scared to death of this thing. And anyhow, that was my very first wolf catch. And it was the only one that I caught that season. Like I said, it was at the very end of the year. By the 3rd year, I actually snared 2 more wolves that next season. And then I started kind of figuring it out. One of the biggest learning portions of one of the biggest lessons, I'll say, that I learned in targeting wolves is how far and fast they travel and how long it takes them to come back. And that's why I think trapping is such a productive mechanism in regards to wolves, because if they're gone for 3 to 5 weeks running their 250 square mile home range, and they come through at 1 o'clock in the morning, there's still a trap waiting there for them. It's not like hunting where you have to physically get yourself in front of them. And, we've got an average pack of 6, average litter of 7. 30% of our packs are having more than 1 litter because more than 1 female is being bred. So for a portion of the year, you have upwards of a dozen to 20 wolves potentially in a given pack. And those wolves will run 10 to 20 miles in a night, no problem. And so they're making these big 3 to 5 week cycles oftentimes through their 250 square mile home range. And as a trapper, you have to keep your gear operable, keep people away from it, make sure that you're not setting, where there's other species that could potentially end up being bycatch, because that's nothing anybody wants. And still, be working through the depth of the snow to keep your traps or your snares operable. So it's a real challenge, but yeah, it's I've got a love-hate relationship with trying to target wolves. They are the most amazing animal there is out there, but the biggest challenge I've ever faced in the woods.
The wolf conversation is one that, I mean, you do it justice. Everybody who I talk to that engages wolves, either hunting, actively hunting, or trapping. Seth Simpson has a big story about how he was hired to essentially protect some cattle, and he did end up shooting a wolf that was, he had decoy dogs, like he's got all kinds of hounds and stuff. So, and he said it was like surreal, like looking through the scope, seeing the wolf come at him. He's like, this is wild.
Yeah.
There is an appreciation, there is a love and respect for this animal, but at the same time, it's like, listen, just because I love and respect an animal doesn't mean like, that it's the right thing in our current system. Right. And just as we were talking about right before the mics went on, it's like, listen, anytime I do any bit on wolves, you have people saying that wolves have destroyed elk and moose and hunting. Right.
Yep.
And then the other people chime in, and I've watched these arguments go back and forth. It's like, oh, it just hurts my head, because you have the other people chime in that say, hey, the elk population is higher now than it's been in like the last 10 years or 20 years, or it's higher than it was pre-wolf introduction. And as you pointed out, you're like, both can be right. Right?
They're absolutely both right.
We can have high elk or moose or whatever populations. We can have high big game populations. But the person who's trying to hunt them doesn't have access to them, right? Because and wolves are in part to blame, because they've moved ecosystems, they've changed grazing habits, they've changed all kinds of different things. We also have other problems like private land ownership and access to things of that nature. Sure, but it's like, listen, we have to deal with what we have in front of us, right? Like, we can't change the legality of private land ownership at this time. And there is conversation, obviously, in the state house about, addressing some of those issues, but it's like, we're not fixing them right here today. But,
right.
Your piece of it is, okay, look, to whatever degree we can manage the wolf population, not necessarily eradicating them, not that would even necessarily be possible, but manage them so that we can have a certain population of wolves that exist, a target population number, manage it so they can exist, right? But we can also have a sufficient abundance of big game so that we can recreate and behave in the manner that people have become accustomed to, right? If you're just a gentleman you were talking about, if you're somebody who relies on wild game, like my stepmom, I think she was telling me her dad was a fish and game guy, warden out of Montana for like 40 years. I don't think she had beef until she was like well into her 20s, right? So if that's your family, then you're like, listen, like, we need to do what we can do so that I can get back to my way of life, right? And I'm on team human, right? Like 100%. And that's not saying that I don't care about, endangered species and I don't care about animals, but I also believe that, we need to do what we can within reason to support human beings in the way that we've been living our lives, again, within reason. And, like, how do we reconcile that somebody might have this frustrating experience with, like, I don't have access to elk or moose, or I can't get them anymore. And then somebody on the other side saying, don't blame wolves because we have more elk and moose than ever. You just suck at hunting, or something, like whatever that might be.
That's actually a common statement. It kind of cracks me up a little bit. Well, from my perspective, in my opinion is, there's a lack of education there, from a person that points out, oh, well, we have more elk now than what we have ever had, or they say, we're in the heyday of elk hunting. That's a huge misconception, and I'll try to explain why. So back prior to wolves, we had elk seasons that, let's just say as an example. So I grew up in Sandpoint, and so I'm most familiar with the area around there. We had an A tag and a B tag for elk. And B tag being the longer rifle season, you have basically 2 weeks of elk bull elk rifle season with typically 3 to 4 days of cow season right in the middle of all that, right? So a lot of our data for the Idaho Fish and Game Department, specifically for timbered portions of the state, which is the entire northern
Yeah.
2/3 of the state, comes from harvest data. Okay. So when you had these seasons that were 2 weeks long with 3 or 4 days of cow season in the middle, and all of a sudden that abundance of elk that used to live in the back country, in the, at the high elevations at 5,000 and 6,000 feet in the back country, in the timber areas that most people would consider wilderness, even though it's not designated that way, when those elk are pushed out of that country and are now living in people's backyards, running through farm fields, moving up and down the river bottoms and the valley floor, they become a whole lot more visually available to the public, right? So here's a general public that's seeing more elk than what they're accustomed to seeing. They also have a whole lot more access to those elk than what we've ever had. So now we've got elk that are living in the valley floor, and they start causing damage to croplands, right? They start running through farmers' fences, and they start getting into the hay piles, the haystacks in the wintertime. Well, the department is forced to react to that by reducing those numbers, right? So now we open up cow seasons that run from August till February. We have this abundance of elk in people's backyards, whereas they used to have to work for it, and your harvest goes through the roof. Yeah, we may be killing the same number of elk, but are we killing the same elk where we used to? Absolutely not. When you go into that backcountry, I'll give you an example. I think it was around 2020, maybe 2021. I went and drove what I now, it's my trap line route for wolves specifically. It's about 80 miles loop out of Clark Fork. When I was a kid, I went up there with my uncle and my grandpa one time, and it was all we could do to find a shoulder of the road to pull off and park and camp to go elk hunting, right? Because there was such an abundance of elk camp in the backcountry of the Coeur d'Alene Mountains. It was hard to find a place to park. There were elk hanging in meat camps, in elk camps everywhere. Everybody had a meat pole. Everybody had an elk hanging on it. And there was an abundance of elk and therefore an abundance of the hunting community. And it was either 2020 or 2021. I went and drove those 80 miles, and I ran into one hunter up there from Michigan who didn't know anything about the area.
He just popped in.
He just was, picked a spot on the map, figured he'd come check it out. And I took picture after picture after picture of overgrown camping sites, knee-high grass, campsites that used to have wall tents all season that had blowdowns laid across them that hadn't been cut out for a number of years. Those elk don't live there for the most part anymore. There's still some elk up there, but you have to work your tail off and know the country to find them. And so the majority of those elk now live in the Clark Fork River bottoms and out, what the Fish and Game Department labels as the front country. That interface between ag land and the back country is where those elk now live. To top all that off, elk dynamics, just, the biology of an elk, the lead cow kind of dictates what happens with the herd. Those cows used to come down out of the backcountry. They would calve in the valley floor and almost immediately start making their way back up the mountain as the snow melted and the vegetation became lush and green. They would feed on that vegetation and make their way all the way back into the backcountry where they spent the summer and all fall where people would hunt them. And then late winter, they'd make their way back down to the valley floor. Well, that calf that was born in the valley floor, when the cow decided not to go back up the mountain because the wolves were there, that calf never learned it was supposed to. So now you've got numbers of generations of elk that have never learned to go back up the mountain, and now they have a really hard time figuring out how to get them out of people's farm fields. The elk have realized that the food is lush and green and abundant, and if they hang out long enough, they can push through the fences and chew up the farmers' haystacks, and it's really become a problem. In a lot of areas. So back to the original question, there is can both of those entities be right? And the answer is absolutely. They're both absolutely accurate. There's areas of Idaho that has more elk abundance right now than it's ever had, but the majority of our backcountry, honestly, the majority of our state does not have the elk density that we used to have. And that comes, there's a lot of, I try really hard to talk about and use data and facts and figures and numbers because the wolf issue is so confrontational and because everybody's constantly looking for your source, right?
Yeah.
I mean, anytime you say something, oh, well, you've never written a peer-reviewed paper on this. And
yeah, that makes two of us.
Yeah. And so, I mean, it's just something that I hear regularly. But when you look at wolf abundance, and I don't know if we can pull that map up to show for people who are interested, but when you look at wolf abundance and you overlay that map on a picture of where elk are no longer meeting management objectives, as well as where the wolves are causing chronic livestock depredation, it's almost perfectly aligned. I mean, it's very clear to me that wolf overabundance has a huge impact on not only elk but our ag industry.
So essentially what you're saying is, okay, when we have an overabundance of elk, or excuse me, when we have an overabundance of wolves, they're not managed properly, that drives the elk out of backcountry into more farm ag areas where depredation becomes a huge problem because the elk go onto farms, they destroy crops, they destroy stores of crops, all those kinds of things. Those elk have to get killed anyway because they're costing tens of thousands of dollars depending on how much they consume, obviously. And so you're saying, look, if we superimpose one onto the other, they match almost perfectly, which makes a correlation, right? Correlation is not causation, but pretty strong correlation to, hey, you have an overabundance of wolves, you're going to have an increase of depredation from elk on agriculture.
You bet, and it goes so much deeper than that as well. I mean, that's one talking point, but one of the things that I've learned to go back to a bunch is the 2009 delisting rule, and that document. If you have the opportunity to review it, there's so much information in there. Basically, they took 30 years of data and studies about wolves, wolf habitat, wolf behaviors, and they compiled all of the information. They presented it to the public. Everybody scrutinized it from all sides. They went back to the drawing board. They ran through it again. It was scrutinized again. They ran through it again. It was scrutinized again. Then they said, this is what it is. This is what we're doing. Right. We have a recovery goal of 300 wolves with 10 breeding pair and approximately 100 wolves in each of Montana, Idaho, and Wyoming. That's our recovery goal. This is our mission. They were sued over it. It was litigated. It was peer-reviewed again. I think they were sued again over it. It came out, this is the data. This is what it shows. These are the facts. This is our target. They met that goal in the year 2000, and the delisting process that would have allowed states to manage wolf densities and maintain them at a low level took 9 years of litigation for the state to obtain management authority. Well, during that time frame, the wolf population exploded way beyond what anybody expected it to. So one of the things that I've learned to go back to is some of the studies that were presented and the data that was presented in the 2009 delisting rule, where they clearly talk about
keep saying 2009 delisting rule?
Correct. So when the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service delisted the wolves from the ESA, that was in 2009. So that one of the documents that I've emailed you is the 2009 delisting rule. Within that rule, not only did they state that at that time, that wolf population of 300, which was the recovery goal, had exploded and become 1,500. And that's spanning all of the NRMDPS, the Northern Rocky Mountain Distinct Population Segment Area, which encompasses all of Montana, Idaho, Wyoming, the eastern 1/3 of both Washington and Oregon, and a little section of Utah.
Gotcha.
So they stated at that time that the management objective, they stated that wolves would be managed for 1,100 total, spanning that entire system, with approximately 400 in Montana, 500 in Idaho, and 200 to 300 in Wyoming. Well, by the time they got them delisted, they had already reached the level of 1,500 for the system. They stated at that time that if we tried to maintain 1,500 wolves, we did not have suitable habitat for that number, and maintaining 1,500 wolves in this entire system would cause them to slowly deplete their own prey base, and it would also lead to chronic livestock depredation. And
Because essentially what you're saying is, look, there's going to be a negative feedback. If you have 1,500, their native or their just their natural calorie source is not going to be able to sustain them. So that will be bad for them. The fallout of that obviously will be enhanced or increased depredation on domesticated livestock. That's the idea. Yep. So it's like there's not enough natural food. They're inherently going to be in conflict with ranchers. This is going to be bad for everybody if you keep them at 1,500.
Yep,
got it.
That was essentially the statement, and that I printed off a few different excerpts from that document because people question me on this regularly. So I'd just like to read a couple of those,
please,
if you would. There's a natural limit to how many wolves suitable habitat in the NRM can support. Preliminary data indicates wolf pack distribution has been stagnant since 2002. Livestock conflicts and wolf control have increased in some areas, and wolf numbers may be stabilizing, and that may limit the populations long-term to around 1,500 wolves. Wolf populations above carrying capacity appear to be more susceptible to disease than those below carrying capacity. So that's just one small excerpt. Now, before I read the rest of this, I just want to take you back for a minute to the basics of just common biology.
Sure.
You can talk to a first grader and ask them their opinion on this, and they'll tell you the right answer. Every living thing has to have a set amount of food, water, shelter, and space to thrive, right? I mean, that's just common knowledge.
Sure.
Right? So food, water, shelter, and space. Biologists label that suitable habitat, right? That's what they're talking about.
Right.
When they say you have to have a suitable habitat to house X number of wolves, they're talking about how much food, water, shelter, and space is available to them in healthy abundance, correct? So when they're talking about 1,500 wolves, potentially maxing that out for the entire NRM DPS, it's really important to remember that that's related to the health of the wolves. Right? I mean, that's one of my biggest questions to those who are so opposed to wolf management is how many is enough for you, and why do you hate wolves so much that you want them to have to live in lack? Right? I mean, we know we only have so much suitable habitat available to wolves, so why would you want them to be overabundant and suffer what comes from that? Everybody says let nature balance itself, and as we talked before we came on, nature will most definitely balance itself. But what most people don't realize is for nature to balance itself, you have a prey base that we have built through 130 years of using the North American model of wildlife conservation to have surplus and abundance for the hunting community, right? So for consumptive use, right. Also for recreational viewing. I absolutely love viewing wildlife. So in order to maintain that, you can't have a predator population that is beyond what you have suitable habitat to house, right? Because you have this prey base that we've built up. As the predator population grows and expands, sooner or later it outweighs what you have prey base for them, correct?
Right. The carrying capacity is just not there.
It's just not there. So then what happens to all those wolves?
Right.
Right? I mean, in most predator situations, the predator ends up dying of disease and starvation, and that's not a death that I wish on any animal. I mean, that's horrible, right? So I don't know if you've ever seen a mangy coyote or a mangy wolf, but it's really ugly. It's not something that I would want any species to have to suffer through. So nature will most definitely balance itself. These documents, what they're talking about is you only have so much suitable habitat available for wolves, and therefore we can only have, to have a healthy wolf population, you can only have so much abundance of wolves because there's only so much suitable habitat available.
Right.
So,
and to that point, and I think I mentioned this, but my grandfather, step grandfather, was a fish and game warden, and when my stepmom was younger, they would, living in Montana, driving around, and over the winter, she reported that they would see in some winters when there was a glut of deer and they had just really, really overpopulated. There was not enough habitat to maintain them. And they would essentially be trying to jump over these fences, getting from point A to point B, whatever deers were doing in the winter. And they'd be so weak, they wouldn't make it over the 4 or 5 foot fence, and they'd land halfway, their hips on one side and their chest on the other side. And ultimately we'd just starve to death, stuck on this fence because they were too weak to get themselves off. And she said they would see hundreds of them.
Yep.
And then this is her as like a little girl, like driving down some, road in, wild Montana. It's like you just see hundreds and hundreds of deer just dying or dead. And you're like, wow, that's really bad. So yeah, the balance will come. Like we will get eventually tend towards a balance, but we also tend towards oscillation where it's like, things are good and everybody expands and then things get bad and everybody contracts. Like you don't have checks and balances and debit cards and, savings accounts when you're living as a wild animal. It's like there is no rainy day fund, right? It's like the fat you can carry on your body to survive a harsh or prolonged lack of sustenance. And that's it, right? Like that's your whole rainy day fund. And the absence of that, or if you extend beyond what you can, it's over. Like it's just full on over.
Yep. That's absolutely it. So, with that in mind, I'd like to read a couple more of these. So here's another section where they revert back to the conversation.
Thank you so much for coming, by the way. I know this took a while to get lined up. I'm so enjoying this conversation and everything you're bringing. Like, this is great.
I appreciate the opportunity. So here's another excerpt. It states, we believe maintaining the NRM gray wolf population at or above 1,500 wolves in the currently occupied areas would slowly reduce wild prey abundance in suitable wolf habitat. This would result in a gradual decline in the number of wolves that could be supported in suitable habitat. Higher rates of livestock depredation in these and surrounding areas would follow. Here's another one. The current carrying capacity of suitable habitat in the NRM may be around 1,500 wolves. The population is likely to continue to reproduce at high rates, however. Attempts to maintain the population above 1,500 wolves may be difficult because the suitable habitat will be fully occupied and packs attempting to colonize unsuitable habitat would cause chronic livestock conflict. So, back then they spent enough time to studying what we have available for, wolves. They spent enough time studying the suitable habitat available for wolves that they fully understood how much wolf density our states could withstand and still maintain healthy ungulate populations. That was something that they put a lot of time and effort and work into. So here, beyond that, it fast forward a little bit. It says after delisting, the wolf population will be managed by the states, National Park Service, and Service to average over 1,100 wolves, fluctuating around 400 wolves in Montana, 500 in Idaho, and 200 to 300 in Wyoming. Recovery by state. At the end of 2000, the NRM population first met its overall numerical and distributional recovery goal of a minimum of 30 breeding pairs and over 300 wolves well distributed amongst Montana, Idaho, and Wyoming. So the reason I read that specifically right out of that document is because every time I try to share this information with people, they immediately hit me with, well, what's your source? Where did you get this information?
Fake news.
Yeah, you must be making this up, right?
Yeah.
And I don't share that to be a know-it-all. I certainly am not. If there's one thing I've learned about wolves, there is no hard rule. Targeting wolves over the years, that's the one thing that you can always count on is change. Every wolf is different. They all have a different personality. They all behave a little bit different from one to the next. And therefore, whatever wolf happens to be leading a given pack will also dictate the behavior patterns of that pack within that territory. And so, I hear these guys all the time, they'll call me up and they say, oh gosh, I heard that you guys have a wolf problem and I'm from back east and I've got 4 days and I just wondered, should I buy 3 tags or should I buy 10? I'll buy 10. You think 10 will be enough for 3 days? And it's so hard for me.
It'll be more than enough, sir. It'll be more than enough. God bless you.
It's so hard to try to help them understand what they're up against. And people will also constantly say, oh, well, you get on social media and every other comment is, well, if you find the elk, you'll find the wolves. If it were only that easy, we would not have a wolf problem. That's not how it works. Wolves travel so far, so quickly. Where I trap wolves is up at 5,500 to 6,000 feet because I don't want to be anywhere near other animals. I don't want to be around other people. I just want to be able to trap wolves, target wolves specifically. And so that's where I go to trap them. Those wolves, in a half a day's time, they only have to eat every 3 or 4 days. In 2 hours, they can trek through 2 drainages and drop out over the winter range over Padre Lake and drop all the way down to the shoreline, kill and eat, and be back where they started before it gets dark, or before it gets daylight, excuse me. So the concept that if you find elk, that you're going to find wolves, in my opinion, from the packs that I've been around, is just straight up false. That's not how it works. In the areas that I target wolves, those wolves have become accustomed to being pursued, and therefore they have favorite haunts where they can get away from not only other wildlife species that are an annoyance to them, mountain lions and bears, etc., but also from people. And that's where they prefer to spend their time. They don't have to be where their prey base is. When you're talking about an animal that travels 10 to 20 miles in a given night, commonly those wolves that are in Colorado, I was reading one of the reports the other day, some of those wolves are averaging 40 miles a day. It's incredible the amount of ground that they can cover.
You offer such a reasonable position. And again, like this whole conversation, most people that I talk to want to blow up one side or the other. It's like, oh, people just, you have the conservationists or people that are leaning more towards, tempering the frustration around them, criticizing people that have like smoke a pack a day or, bumper stickers. And then you have people on the other side that are saying, anybody who says anything positive about wolves are like the devil, like you must be a California transplant.
Right. Yeah.
Which I just like crack up every time I hear it. But the bottom line is, it's like, listen, at a certain number, right? Could we have 10,000 wolves here? Could we have 20,000 wolves here? No, there's a number that's too many. Okay, great. We've established, you can't do 20,000. That'd be bad. All right.
Yep.
So what number is right? Now we can argue about what that number may be. I'm not going to argue with, because I'm an idiot. And like, there are smarter people than us than figure this thing out. So it's like, okay, the smart people who actually know something, they've come up with a number, right? And that's should be the goal. And in the absence of proper engagement through the local and state government, it's like, you guys have figured out a way. It's like, listen, we're striving for that number. We're striving for the number that people smarter than all of us figured out, right? Because we all agree there is a number that's too many, and there are bad consequences of that. And you're helping people understand how to engage with that, right? Which is the nature of your wolf trapping and training programs, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And so we actually, we'll have a booth up at the Sheep Show. We've got 4 different trade shows that we're attending this year, strictly to try to help people understand the problem. We talk about this 1,500 being the number that the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service came to at the end of scrutinizing 30 years of data. And the state of Idaho, for numbers of years, had over 1,500 wolves in Idaho alone.
Just Idaho, right?
Just Idaho alone.
Because the 1,500 number you're talking about was that entire Northern Rocky area.
Correct.
Right.
The entire Northern Rocky Mountain segment. So, Montana has had over 1,100 wolves for more than 10 years. Idaho has as well. Wyoming has maintained their 200 to 300 because the majority of their state, they don't even have seasons. It's just, a shoot on sight type of a situation. However, a lot of people, there's a big misconception there. A lot of people think that that's what's kept the population low in Wyoming, and they don't understand that there's not a lot of actual wolf habitat in the vast majority of Wyoming that doesn't have seasons. So the majority of wolf habitat in Wyoming does have a very strict and limited season. And that's
Gotcha.
the reason that their harvest numbers are also low.
But Wyoming, we're talking about the elk in Wyoming. They have a glut of elk currently in Wyoming, correct? So the idea that like you could have, if you have wolf populations, you won't have elk. It's like, well, that seems to be at odds. Am I misunderstanding that data?
Well, it also takes a whole lot more than just elk to be suitable habitat for wolves. The wolves in my area, the reason that they can't do control actions that involve helicopters, et cetera, is because it's so heavily dense timber, you could never see them, right? So what I view to be wolf habitat and what I think wolf habitat, consists of, there's not a whole lot of it in a lot of Wyoming. And so therefore those wolves aren't going to take up residency there. There's going to be wolves passing through there because approximately 12 to 12.5% of a wolf population are lone wolves or dispersing wolves. And so you're consistently going to have wolves traveling through a given area, but that doesn't mean they're going to take up residency there. It doesn't mean that they're going to control those elk numbers. And so I think that that's another big misconception. And our goal for the Foundation for Wildlife Management is we're trying to make it feasible for sportsmen to be able to be productive in assisting the state in reaching their management objectives, right? So the wolf management objective for the state of Idaho right now in the wolf management plan is to fluctuate around 500 wolves, just as they were originally directed to do by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And that means that population is actually going to drop well below 500 during the harvest season, because it's going to jump way above 500 after they whelp, right? If you have an average pack size of 6 and an average litter of 7, or even if it was less than that, if you had an average pack of 5, let's say, and you only had 5 or 6 pups, that's still an awful lot of pups in any given area. We don't harvest near the number of pups that are born in any given season. People have this misconception that somehow hunting and trapping is what reduced the wolf population to what it was prior to this transplant. And that couldn't be further from the truth either. You got to think back to, what do the history books show us? We had everybody either feared or hated a wolf, right? They were shot on sight by every person out there. Then on top of that, you had government entities that strictly went out and targeted wolves. You had state level officers that targeted wolves. You had local county trappers and things that went out and targeted wolves, and they still couldn't get their numbers down. They still couldn't control their population. It was poison that reduced their number. It wasn't hunting and trapping. It was poison. And nobody wants to see that take place, right? So there's just such a misconception.
And to that point, if I may, it's like, do you want 1,500 elk or 1,500 wolves that are at risk of, going where they shouldn't with ag lands, preying on domesticated livestock, and constantly hated and in the wrong place, right? Or do you want 500 that are living their best lives? And yes, they are managed, and they're not being poisoned. They're not, being chased down by somebody because they ate their sheep or something like that, right? So there's a quality of life question, which is like, okay, you like wolves. Do you want to see like a really strong, thriving, healthy, controlled population of wolves? Or do you want to see wolves that are like on the fringe of survival and damaging other things and reviled by everyone? Because if it's like 100 or 200 pairs, and everybody's happy that we have 100 or 200 pairs, and those wolves are awesome, and they, there isn't depredation isn't a problem, and predation is not a problem to the level where people feel that they can't actually attain or sustain their lifestyle, right? Like, everybody would be happy with 200, right? Like, is there some magic number around 1,000 or 1,500 that's like, oh, we have to have this? Like, why not? Like, let's go down to a population that, we don't have to interfere with each other.
We're population density of wolves that allows wolves to be wolves, do their thing, live their best life where they should be in their suitable habitat, and still allows their game, their prey base to be abundant, and still allows a surplus of game for the hunting community to be able to partake in the hunting activities and feeding their families as well. There's a healthy balance there that can be found. We struggled in the very beginning for several years to even, a lot of us were starting to be very hesitant to even believe that it was possible to reduce their numbers that, to a controllable level. And I got to tell you, for the last 10 years as an organization, we have worked to unite all of our sportsmen's groups in the states to the best of our ability. Sportsmen are so nitpicky and stuff, and we all have a special interest, and that's great. And those special interests focus. There's a reason for all these different organizations, but when we interact with each other, all too often we bash each other and we put each other down, right? There's guys that don't want to hunt unless they can shoot 1,000 yards, and there's guys that say if you shoot over 100 yards, you're not hunting. There's the traditionalist, and then there's the guys that really love technology. Right. There's the trapping community, and then you have bird dog hunters who don't want traps on the landscape because they don't want to have to release their dog from a trap. There's the general populace of America, unfortunately, has been so misled and miseducated about trapping that they're scared to death of them. I put my hands in my traps regularly for people to watch so that they can understand that it's not going to harm you. There's a lot of misconception. Anyhow,
it's not like that Tom and Jerry big claws.
No. It's kind of interesting to me. I was at a cattleman's convention at one point, and I had a trap set that was sitting on my table, and there was a kid that was asking me about traps and stuff, and I set it on the ground, and I was just showing it to him, and I went to set it off with my foot, and he jumped back, and his eyes were out this big around, and he was all panicked. He's like, "Oh my gosh, you're lucky that thing didn't grab a hold of you." And so I immediately set the trap and stuffed my hand in it, and I said, "Are you afraid of that thing?" And his eyes, about just like saucers popped out of his head. And I said, "You don't have to be afraid of it. Most people don't understand how a trap works and how to get their pet out of it if they were to have that incident happen, which is very rare anyhow." But anyhow, long story short, I get talking in circles. I forget where I was
No,
going
no,
with all
I
that.
appreciate it. What is your relationship with the cattle associations? Because I have to imagine, like you have met, I believe his name was Philip Davis,
Yeah.
recently, and at the Farm Bureau convention,
Yep.
super great guy, and come to find out that he had a lot of problems with wolves over the years with his cattle, and that's bad. Obviously, it's his livelihood. There's nothing good about that,
Yeah.
and is this type of education and support that you guys offer, is that something that's engaged with or very welcomed by the like ranching community?
Absolutely. That was actually where I was going with that whole topic before I got sidetracked. So we've spent the last 10 years trying to unite our sportsmen's groups to create one large voice, right? Because when I go into the commission and I talk about how many members that we have at 3,500 members, that's a whole different thing when I walk in there and I've got, the director of government affairs for the Farm Bureau stand up there saying, "I'm here representing 180,000 Idaho families," right? So not only did we work hard to unite our sportsmen's groups and challenge everybody to set our differences aside for the topics that we can't agree on and focus on collaborating for the topics that we all can agree on, so we can create positive change that impacts everybody. And then we tried hard to tie that voice into our ag industry leadership. So we regularly work with the Farm Bureau and the cattlemen and the wool growers when we have proposals to take to the Fish and Game Commission. We have one this year that we're actually pushing.
That's what I was going to ask. What's the legislation that you guys are looking to move the needle on this year? Because we're obviously in the legislative session. Spencer Black's actually coming out. We're going to grab dinner in like a week or two, and love all the Farm Bureau guys, Russ, Dexton, Braden, they're
Yep.
awesome. So what are you guys working on this year?
So as far as legislation, FRWM is not pushing a whole lot this year specifically for Idaho. Montana only has session every other year, so there's a lot going on over there right now. Some of those things, the details haven't been hashed out yet, so I don't feel at liberty to discuss them necessarily.
Sure.
That'll come to light soon enough. But one of the things that I am very proud of is over the last 10 years, we have been able to successfully maximize sportsmen' ability to harvest wolves by expanding seasons, by expanding tools, by trapping specifically. Being trappers oftentimes will reach up to 30 or 35% success rate. Hunting success rate for wolves is less than 0.25%. And so, if we're going to control wolves, you have to have trappers on the landscape. And that's kind of where our program comes into play. To run a trap line, it's extremely expensive. And now I mentioned that the wolf packs that I'm in, the 4 packs that I study intently, they run a 3 to 5 week cycle. In fact, I had a 63-day average pass through last year for the whole season. It was every 63 days they came through one time. Well, by law, I have to be at every trap set every 72 hours and check that gear. So the amount of fuel that's burned every 3 days running that 80-mile loop up there on my snow machine adds up quick, right? So the only way that a trapper can really afford to target wolves successfully is to trap from day one till the end of the season. And they can't afford to do so because we used to have a fur market that was extremely high. Now an average wolf pelt might sell for $150, $200 maybe, especially if you take it and get it tanned. But so our program offers a reimbursement of a person's expenses to get out and harvest wolves. And the goal there is to try to make it feasible for these guys who are willing to put in the time and effort and energy and donate their effort to
Right.
go try to help the state control wolf populations where wolves are overabundant. We want to help cover their expenses so that
Right.
they'd be willing to do that.
It's not insult to injury. Like I get to lose
Correct.
my whole weekend and all of the money for all of the stuff.
Yep.
Yeah, I get that 100%.
It's a challenge, and it's not like even the trapping community is out there. I mean, I trap from day one till day close, and honestly, I only average 5 or 6 wolves a year, and that's if I'm really working my tail off. I mean, it's a really difficult task. The highest number of wolves ever harvested in Idaho by one person was 20, and that was by a gentleman that just is really passionate about it. And so that's kind of the concept of our program, and the goal is we want the hunting community, we want the people who are enjoying having a healthy abundance of prey base, elk mostly, right? I mean, they're the most commonly hunted, although there's a whole lot more that comes into play there. But we want the average elk hunter in Idaho to support the F4WM program so that we can afford to keep the trapping community, because there's very few of those who have the ways and means and knowledge,
Right.
to be on the ground actively running a trap line. If you have kids in school, if you have church on Sunday, if you have a full-time job, you cannot trap wolves, because you have to be on the mountain every 72 hours to check traps. And so there's very few people who can get that job done, and it's costing them a ton of money. So our program is a mechanism for the hunting community or sportsmen or concerned citizens, ranchers specifically, to be able to donate, to become a member, and those funds go in the pocket of somebody who has successfully removed a wolf to cover their out-of-pocket expenses that they've already paid out, their fuel, that sort of thing, equipment, tools, etc.
That's beautiful. And again, I appreciate that your obviously balanced position, which is, hey, let's get it to a thriving population number so that the wolves are good and we'll be good. And hey, let's come together as people and solve this problem. And that's one thing that I see repeated over and over in the state, which I have such a love for, which is, look, like this show we're on, like there's a problem. We need better, higher quality media with leaders in Idaho. Great. Well, who's doing it? Like if we look to the state of Idaho, it's like, well, we're not going to convince somebody in government to like sit down and do this. Like somebody has to do it. And I'm not even saying I'm doing it the best. Like if somebody else wants to do it, that's fine too. I can move on with my life. But again, we have to be the solution to these things. And that's what you're doing. And that's what I understand of your program. And I appreciate you, sir. Listen, you're on the way down all the way to another, you were just passing by here. I've taken a huge chunk of your time. Is there anything you'd like to hit here at the end?
I would just like to offer that we could use membership and support. People, if you have heard the message that I've shared with you today, and it resonates with you, if you believe that wolves can live in abundance and that abundance can be controlled to a level that we also have healthy abundance of other species, and you want to support our efforts and what we're doing, we would love to have you join us. If you go to our website at f4wm.org, there's a lot of information on there. You can join as a member. We also have, we've got 11 different chapters. We have 10 fundraising banquets this year. First one kicks off the 25th of January in Kalispell, Montana. We've got a chapter in Sandpoint, Coeur d'Alene, Lewiston, Salmon, right here in Treasure Valley. We actually have a banquet in Caldwell. We also have 6 different chapters in the state of Montana. We've got Kalispell, Trout Creek, the Bitterroot over in Hamilton. Helena is a brand new chapter that we just started. We also have a chapter that just started up in Bozeman. And then Libby, Montana as well. There's fundraiser banquets that are honestly a kick in the pants. We give away a lot of prizes and everybody has a good time. Prime rib dinner, auction, etc. If you want to learn more about the program, come on out, meet some of our crew. Find out that we're not a bunch of bloodthirsty redneck hillbillies that are just out slaughtering everything, because that seems to be the perception. We are genuinely grassroots effort to try to assist our Idaho Fish and Game Department in managing our overabundant wolf populations where they're causing problems.
Well, God bless you, sir. Thank you for what you're doing for Idaho and the surrounding states. I hope 2025 is a good year for you.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate the opportunity to come on the show.
Absolutely.